The energy bars of Marcus Chen's cell hummed with a low, menacing frequency that had become the soundtrack to his final days. 3 weeks. That's all the time he had left before the Galactic Federation would drag him to the execution chambers deep within orbital station Nemesis. 3 weeks to somehow escape a prison that had never been breached in its 200-year history. Marcus pressed his back against the cold metallic wall of his cell, staring through the translucent energy barrier that separated him from the corridor beyond. The station was a marvel of alien engineering, sleek surfaces that seemed to bend light itself, corridors that stretched impossibly long, and gravity fields that could be adjusted at will. Everything about it screamed advanced civilization, making his human technology look like stone tools by comparison. "Just a dumb human mechanic," he muttered to himself, echoing the words that Commander Vorthak had spat at him during his sentencing. "Nothing but grease under your fingernails and delusions in your head." But Marcus Chen had always been more than he appeared. Back on Earth, in the underground resistance workshops of New Chicago, he'd been the one who figured out how to reverse engineer Zephyrian shield generators. He'd been the one who'd kept their stolen fighters running when everyone else said it was impossible. And he'd been the one stupid enough to volunteer for the suicide mission that had landed him here. The soft whisper of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor, accompanied by the rhythmic click of armored boots. Marcus straightened, recognizing the distinctive gait immediately. Lyra Vex'hai, his guard, his captor, and perhaps his only chance at survival. She appeared before his cell like a vision from an alien myth. 7 feet of perfectly sculpted Zephyrian warrior. Her blue-gray skin seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and her silver hair was pulled back in the traditional military knot. Her armor was a work of art, form-fitting plates that enhanced rather than concealed her athletic build, inscribed with rank insignias and battle honors that Marcus couldn't read, but somehow understood, spoke of countless victories. Most striking were her eyes, large, luminous, and the color of deep space at twilight. They held an intelligence that Marcus had come to respect over the past months, but also something else, something that looked almost like sadness. "Prisoner 7749, she said in accented standard, her voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of her species. "Your evening meal." A small slot opened in the energy barrier, and she placed a tray of the standard nutrition blocks inside. The food was perfectly balanced for human physiology. The Federation was nothing if not efficient in keeping their prisoners alive until execution. Marcus didn't move toward the food immediately. Instead, he studied Lyra's face, looking for any sign of the person beneath the soldier. In the 3 months since his capture, she'd been nothing but professional, polite even, but never cruel like some of the other guards. "You know," Marcus said carefully, "I've always wondered why they assigned a warrior like you to guard duty. Someone with your decorations. Shouldn't you be leading fleets or conquering star systems?" For just a moment, something flickered across her features. Pain, regret. But it was gone so quickly Marcus almost thought he'd imagined it. "My assignments are not your concern, prisoner," she replied, but her voice lacked its usual firmness. Marcus took a step closer to the barrier, close enough that he could see his reflection in her large eyes. "I'm dying, Lyra." She went perfectly still. In all their interactions, he'd never used her name before. It hung in the air between them like a confession. "The medical scanners," she began. "Can't detect it," Marcus interrupted, putting every ounce of desperation he felt into his voice. "It's something uniquely human. A genetic defect that doesn't manifest until we're under extreme stress. The doctors back home called it Chen syndrome. Ironic, right?" He watched her face carefully. Zephyrians were naturally empathetic, their emotional centers more developed than most species. If anyone would respond to a story like this, it would be her. "I have maybe a week left," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Maybe less. And I know this is going to sound pathetic, but I'm 25 years old and I've never—" He let his voice trail off, looking away as if embarrassed. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. "Never what?" Marcus met her gaze again, and this time he didn't have to fake the vulnerability in his expression, because while the dying part was a lie, this next part was the most honest thing he'd ever said. "I've never been with anyone, never experienced connection. I spent my whole life working on machines, fighting in a war that seemed to have no end, and now I'm going to die alone in this cell, having never known what it feels like to be wanted, to be close to someone." The silence stretched between them like a vast ocean. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, could see the rapid rise and fall of Lyra's chest as she processed his words. "You're asking me to," she said finally. "I'm asking for mercy," Marcus replied. "Not as your prisoner, but as one person to another. I know what I am to your people. Just another human, just another terrorist. But beneath that uniform, beneath those decorations, aren't you still someone who understands what it means to be alone?" Lyra's hand moved unconsciously to a small pendant at her throat, something Marcus had noticed before but never dared ask about. Her fingers traced its surface, and in that simple gesture he saw more vulnerability than she'd shown in all their previous encounters combined. I cannot," she whispered, but even as she said it, Marcus could see the conflict raging behind her eyes. "I'm not asking you to break any major protocols," Marcus pressed gently. "I'm not asking you to help me escape or compromise station security. I'm just asking, as my last request, to not die never having experienced what it means to be human, to connect with someone, even if it's just for one night." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, her alien features unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his desperate gambit and the fading echo of her footsteps. As he watched her retreating form disappear around the corner, Marcus Chen allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. He'd planted the seed. Now he just had to hope that beneath all that armor and military discipline, Lyra Vex'hai still had a heart that could be touched by the plight of a dying man, even if that man was lying through his teeth. The next few hours would determine whether he lived to see another day, or whether his final gamble had just sealed his fate forever. Lyra Vex'hai stood in her private quarters, staring out at the swirling nebula that painted the void in shades of purple and gold. Her reflection in the reinforced viewport showed a warrior in perfect condition, 7 feet of disciplined muscle, scars that told stories of survival, and eyes that had seen too much death for someone barely 25 years old. Her fingers still traced the small pendant at her throat, a habit she thought she'd broken years ago. The smooth crystal was warm against her skin, containing the preserved essence of her bondmate, Kyle, the one person who had ever seen past her armor to the frightened young woman beneath, the one person who had died because of her choices. "Status report," she spoke to the air, and immediately her quarters AI responded in crisp, efficient tones. "Prisoner 7749 shows no signs of deception in voice pattern analysis. Stress indicators are consistent with genuine distress. However, no medical scans have detected any life-threatening conditions." Lyra closed her eyes. "Cross-reference human genetic conditions that might evade our standard medical protocols." There was a pause. "Searching, 7 possible conditions found, most rare, affecting fewer than 1 in 10 million humans. Chen syndrome is listed among theoretical genetic defects, though no confirmed cases exist in Federation medical databases." Of course, Marcus Chen, if that was even his real name, was gambling on her ignorance of human medicine. But as she stood there, watching the eternal dance of cosmic dust and starlight, Lyra found herself wondering if it mattered whether he was lying. 3 months ago, she would have reported his request immediately and moved on. 3 months ago, she was still the perfect soldier, the decorated war hero, the pride of the Zephyrian military command. But 3 months ago, she hadn't been assigned to guard duty as punishment for the greatest failure of her career. The door chimed softly, and Captain Threnner's voice crackled through the intercom. "Commander Vex'hai, report to Briefing Room 7 immediately." Lyra straightened her shoulders, pushing thoughts of dying prisoners and impossible requests from her mind. "Acknowledged." The walk through the station's corridors gave her time to compose herself. Other guards nodded respectfully as she passed. Her reputation preceded her, even here. The Butcher of Kepler Station. They'd called her after she'd held the mining platform against an entire human fleet for 6 days. The hero of the Veil Nebula for the battle where she'd saved 3 colonies from human raiders. What they didn't call her was what she truly was. The woman who'd gotten her entire squad killed because she'd hesitated at the crucial moment. Briefing Room 7 was smaller than the main tactical centers, reserved for disciplinary actions and sensitive discussions. Captain Threnor stood with his back to the door, his massive frame making even this spacious room feel cramped. At 8 feet tall and built like a walking fortress, he was everything a Zephyrian military commander should be: intimidating, efficient, and utterly without mercy. "Commander," he said without turning around, "I understand you've had an interesting conversation with prisoner 7749. Lyra's blood ran cold. Of course, the cells were monitored, every word recorded and analyzed. Sir, the prisoner made a request that I deemed inappropriate to fulfill. I responded according to protocol. Did you? Threnor finally turned, his scarred face showing something that might have been amusement. Because according to the monitoring station, you spent 17 minutes staring at his cell door after leaving. That doesn't sound like protocol to me. Heat rose in Lyra's cheeks, the Zephyrian equivalent of a blush. I was processing the interaction, sir, ensuring I hadn't missed any security implications. Ah, Threnor moved closer, his presence filling the space between them. And what security implications did you identify in a dying terrorist's request for sexual comfort? The crude way he phrased it made Lyra's jaw clench. None, sir, which is why I denied the request. Good, because it would be unfortunate if our decorated war hero developed sympathies for the enemy. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Especially given why you're here in the first place. The words hit like a physical blow. Lyra fought to keep her expression neutral, but inside, the old wound tore open fresh. Kyle's face flashed in her memory, laughing, alive, trusting her to make the right choice, the choice that got him killed. I understand, sir. Do you? Threnor circled her slowly, a predator evaluating prey. Because your psychological profile suggests a tendency toward emotional attachment, dangerous in a soldier, fatal in a guard. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the metallic scent of his augmented implants. The human dies in 18 days. Your job is to ensure he reaches that execution alive and contained. Nothing more, nothing less. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Excellent. His expression shifted to something resembling satisfaction. Dismissed. Lyra maintained perfect military bearing until the door sealed behind her. Only then did she allow her shoulders to slump, the weight of command and expectation pressing down like a gravitational field. The walk back to the detention level felt longer than usual. Guards nodded their respect. Automated systems chimed their recognition, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the low hum of the station's engines pushing them through the void. All normal, all routine. So why did everything feel like it was falling apart? She paused outside Marcus Chen's cell, checking her chronometer. He would be sleeping now. Humans required nearly 8 hours of rest per day, a luxury most Zephyrians found baffling. Through the energy barrier, she could see his form curled on the narrow bunk, looking smaller than he had when awake. 25 years old, the same age she'd been when she'd first taken command of a squad. The same age Kale had been when he'd died trusting her judgment. "Computer," she whispered, "display prisoner 7749's psychological profile." The holographic display materialized in front of her, showing brain scans, behavioral analysis, and personality mapping. Standard terrorist profile, high intelligence, strong moral convictions, tendency toward self-sacrifice for perceived greater good. But there, buried in the data, was something else. Attachment disorder. The human had grown up in orphanages and military academies, never forming lasting bonds. His claim about never being with anyone, the computer estimated in 73% probability it was true. Lyra dismissed the display and continued her patrol, but Marcus Chen's words echoed in her mind. "Aren't you still someone who understands what it means to be alone?" He couldn't have known about Kyle, couldn't have known about the isolation that came with command, the weight of decisions that killed the people you cared about. But somehow his words had found their mark with surgical precision. As she completed her rounds and returned to her quarters, Lyra found herself standing at her viewport again, staring out at the infinite dark between the stars. 18 days until Marcus Chen died. 18 days to maintain professional distance and proper protocols. 18 days to decide whether mercy was worth the risk of caring again. In the distance, a star collapsed into itself, its light fading into darkness. Lyra watched it die and wondered if some choices were worth making, even when you knew they'd destroy you. Especially then. Marcus had been awake for hours before Lyra arrived with his morning meal, but he remained perfectly still on his bunk, eyes closed, breathing shallow. He'd learned to read the subtle changes in the station's ambient noise, the shift patterns of different guards, the cycle of automated systems, even the barely perceptible vibrations that indicated which corridors were being used. More importantly, he'd learned to read Lyra. Her footsteps were different today, still precise, still controlled, but there was a hesitation in them that hadn't been there before. She stopped outside his cell for a full 30 seconds before announcing her presence. 30 seconds of silence that spoke volumes about the war raging in her mind. "Prisoner 7749, she said finally. her voice carefully neutral. Morning nutrition. Marcus opened his eyes slowly as if waking from deep sleep and pushed himself upright with deliberate care. He'd spent the night refining his performance, adding subtle signs of weakness that wouldn't trigger medical alerts but would be noticeable to someone watching closely. "Thank you," he said softly, moving toward the meal slot with a slight tremor in his hands. It wasn't entirely feigned. The adrenaline of his desperate gamble was taking its toll. Lyra placed the tray in the slot, but instead of leaving immediately as she usually did, she remained standing outside his cell. Her large, twilight-colored eyes studied his face with an intensity that made Marcus's pulse quicken. "You look tired," she observed. Marcus allowed a bitter smile to cross his features. "Hard to sleep when you're counting down your final days, both to execution and to—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "Well, you know." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and dangerous possibilities. Marcus could see the conflict playing out across Lyra's alien features, duty warring with something deeper, more personal. "The medical scanners," she said finally, "they show nothing wrong with you." Marcus had expected this. "Of course they don't. Chen's syndrome doesn't show up on conventional scans because it affects human neural pathways in ways your technology wasn't designed to detect. It's like, imagine trying to understand a symphony by measuring only the volume. You're missing all the complexity underneath." He moved closer to the energy barrier, close enough that he could see the faint bioluminescent patterns that traced along Lyra's skin, stress markers, he'd learned, that Zephyrians couldn't fully control. "But you can probably sense it anyway, can't you?" he continued. "Your species is naturally empathetic. You can feel when something is wrong, even when your instruments can't measure it." Lyra's hand moved to her throat, fingers tracing that pendant again. "I feel many things, prisoner. Most of them I've learned to ignore, but not all of them." "No," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Not all of them." Marcus took a careful breath, knowing his next words would either open a door or slam it shut forever. "What happened to you, Lyra? What turned a decorated war hero into a prison guard?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Her entire body went rigid, and for a moment Marcus thought she might simply walk away. Instead, she surprised him by answering. "I made a choice," she said, her voice hollow. "I had to choose between following orders and saving someone I cared about. I chose him. And he died anyway, along with 17 other soldiers under my command." Her eyes met his through the energy barrier. "Mercy is a luxury that warriors can't afford." Marcus Chen. "Every time we show compassion, people die." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a crack in the wall he'd built around his own emotions. The pain in her voice was so raw, so genuine, that for a moment he forgot this was supposed to be manipulation. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "But you're wrong about mercy. It's not a luxury. It's what makes us more than just weapons." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "You don't understand. In war, there are only victors and casualties. Mercy just determines which category you fall into." "Then why are you still here?" Marcus challenged gently. "Why haven't you walked away? Why are you listening to a dying prisoner pour out his heart when you could be anywhere else on this station?" The question hung in the air like a charged particle, ready to ignite or dissipate, depending on her response. Marcus could see the exact moment when her defenses cracked, a subtle shift in her posture, a softening around her eyes. "Because," she said finally, 3 months ago, I would have reported your request immediately and moved on. But 3 months ago, I still believed that following orders was enough, that being a perfect soldier would somehow make up for what? For not being a perfect person." The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did Marcus. She stepped back from his cell, hand pressed against her throat as if trying to hold back words that wanted to escape. "I have to go," she said abruptly. "Lyra, wait." Marcus pressed his palm against the energy barrier, feeling the tingle of contained force. "I know you think I'm just manipulating you. Maybe I am, but that doesn't make the truth any less real." She paused, not turning around, but not walking away either. "I really am going to die," he said quietly. "Maybe not in a week like I told you, but in 18 days when they drag me to those execution chambers. And I really have never connected with anyone, never felt like I mattered to another living being." Now she did turn, and Marcus could see tears forming in her large eyes, crystalline droplets that caught the light like tiny stars. "You're asking me to risk everything," she whispered. "I'm asking you to remember that mercy isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing any of us can choose." He paused, then added, and I'm asking you to help me feel human one last time before I stop being human forever." Lyra stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I need to think about this." She turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his thundering heartbeat and the knowledge that his impossible gamble might actually be working. But as he watched her retreating form, he felt something unexpected: guilt. Because somewhere in the middle of his lies, he'd started telling the truth. And somewhere in the middle of manipulation, he'd started to care about the woman whose heart he was trying to break open. The next few days would determine whether that caring would save them both or destroy them completely. In the distance, the station's engines hummed their eternal song, pushing them through the void toward an uncertain future. And in the silence of his cell, Marcus Chen began to wonder if his greatest lie wasn't about dying, but about believing he could escape without leaving a piece of his soul behind. 2 days had passed since their last conversation, and Marcus was beginning to think his gamble had failed. Lyra delivered his meals with mechanical precision, never meeting his eyes, never speaking beyond the required protocol. The woman who had shown him glimpses of vulnerability seemed to have disappeared behind walls of military discipline. But Marcus had learned to read the subtle signs, the way her fingers lingered on the meal slot just a fraction too long, the barely perceptible pause before she announced herself, the fact that she'd taken over all his guard shifts personally when rotation protocol called for multiple guards. She was thinking. And thinking, Marcus had learned, was dangerous for someone trying to suppress their humanity. It was during the night shift of the second day that everything changed. Marcus lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling panels that dimmed to simulate planetary night cycles, when he heard footsteps approaching. Not the crisp, authoritative stride of a guard making rounds, but something softer, more hesitant. "Marcus?" Lyra's voice came through the barrier, so quiet he almost missed it. He sat up immediately, his heart hammering against his ribs. She stood in the corridor shadows, barely visible except for the faint bioluminescent patterns that traced her skin in the darkness. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, not accusingly but with genuine concern. "No," she agreed, "I'm not." She stepped closer to the energy barrier, and in the dim light, Marcus could see that she'd removed her armor. Instead of the imposing military uniform, she wore simple clothing, a flowing tunic that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Without the armor, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also somehow more herself. "I've been thinking about what you said," she continued, her voice carrying an uncertainty he'd never heard before, "about mercy, about connection, about what it means to be human." Marcus rose from his bunk slowly, moving to stand across from her with only the energy barrier between them. "And what did you decide?" "That I don't know anything anymore." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "For 25 years, I've known exactly who I was supposed to be. The perfect soldier, the decorated hero, the weapon that never questions its purpose." She pressed her palm against the barrier, and Marcus could see her hand trembling. "But weapons don't feel guilt, Marcus. They don't wake up every night remembering the faces of the people they've failed to save. Lyra, do you know what my bondmate's last words were?" She interrupted, tears flowing freely now. "He said he was proud of me, proud that I'd chosen to save him instead of following orders. Even as he died, even knowing that my choice had doomed us all, he was proud." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "What was his name?" "Kyle Theron. He was a combat medic, the gentlest person I've ever known. He could take apart a plasma rifle or stitch up a wounded Vorthon with equal skill." She smiled through her tears. "He used to say that healing and fighting were just different sides of the same coin. Both required knowing exactly where to apply pressure. He sounds like he was an extraordinary person." "He was, and I got him killed because I thought love was stronger than war." She looked up at Marcus, her eyes blazing with pain and determination. "But maybe he was right. Maybe some choices are worth making even when you know they'll destroy you." The implications of her words hit Marcus like a physical force. "Lyra, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She moved to the control panel beside his cell, her fingers hovering over the barrier controls. "Because you're right about mercy. It's not weakness. It's the only thing that makes any of this matter. But if they catch you, then they catch me." She met his eyes through the barrier. "I'm tired of being afraid, Marcus. Tired of letting fear make my choices for me." Her hand moved to the control panel, and Marcus felt the energy barrier flicker. "Lyra, wait. There's something I need to tell you." She paused, finger millimeters from the deactivation switch. "What?" Marcus felt the weight of his deception crushing down on him. Looking at her face, seeing the trust, the vulnerability, the courage it was taking for her to make this choice, he couldn't maintain the lie anymore. "I'm not dying," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Lyra's hand froze on the control panel, her expression shifting from confusion to realization, to something that might have been betrayal. "What did you say?" "The Chen syndrome, the genetic defect, it's all fabricated. I made it up because I thought—" He swallowed hard. "Because I thought it was my only chance to escape." Lyra stepped back from the panel as if it had become radioactive. Her face went through a dozen emotions in the space of a heartbeat: shock, anger, hurt, and something that looked like relief. "You lied to me. Yes. You manipulated my emotions, played on my guilt, made me question everything I believe. Yes." Marcus pressed closer to the barrier, desperate to make her understand. "But Lyra, everything else was true. About never being with anyone, about feeling alone, about wanting to feel human before I die. That part was never a lie. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now?" "Because I'm telling you this when I don't have to," Marcus said urgently. "Because I could have let you deactivate that barrier thinking I was dying, and you never would have known the difference. Because I'm risking my only chance at escape, to be honest with you." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, her alien features unreadable. "Why? Why tell me the truth now?" Marcus felt something break open inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart so long ago he'd forgotten it was there. "Because you're not just my way out anymore, Lyra. You're, God help me, you're the first person who's ever made me want to be better than I am." The admission seemed to echo in the corridor, raw and honest and terrifying. Lyra's eyes widened, and Marcus could see the exact moment when her anger transformed into something else entirely. "You stupid, impossible human," she whispered, and despite everything, there was warmth in her voice. "Does that mean you're not going to space me out an airlock?" A laugh escaped her, short, sharp, but genuine. I should report you immediately and request reassignment to the furthest corner of the galaxy. But you're not going to." "No," she said, her hand returning to the control panel. "I'm not. Because you're right about one thing, Marcus Chen. We're both tired of being alone." Her finger touched the control, and the energy barrier flickered and died. For the first time in 3 months, nothing stood between Marcus Chen and freedom. But as he looked at Lyra Vex'hai, really looked at her, seeing the woman beneath the warrior, he realized that freedom wasn't what he wanted anymore. He wanted her. And that realization terrified him more than any prison ever could. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, Marcus and Lyra simply stared at each other across the threshold of his cell. The energy barrier was gone, but neither of them moved, as if the absence of that humming wall had somehow made the space between them more significant, not less. Marcus was the first to break the spell. He stepped forward slowly, carefully, his bare feet touching the cool metal of the corridor floor for the first time in 3 months. The sensation was electric, not just the physical freedom, but the trust it represented. "Lyra," he said softly, "are you sure about this?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached up and touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the line of his jaw as if confirming he was real. Her skin was warm, softer than he'd expected, and carried a faint scent like ozone after rain. "I stopped being sure about anything the moment I met you," she whispered. They were close enough now that Marcus could see the intricate patterns of bioluminescence that traced her skin, delicate lines that pulsed gently with her heartbeat. Without thinking, he raised his hand to mirror her gesture, his palm coming to rest against her cheek. "Your skin," he murmured in wonder. "It's beautiful." Lyra's eyes fluttered closed at his touch. "Zephyrian emotional displays. We can't hide what we feel the way humans can." "I don't want you to hide anything," Marcus said, and he meant it with an intensity that surprised him. She opened her eyes, and he could see galaxy-deep emotions swirling in their depths. "Marcus, what happens now? I've committed treason. When they discover what I've done, they won't," Marcus said with more confidence than he felt. "Not if we're smart about this." "We? I told you I'm not dying, Lyra. I never said I was giving up on escaping." He smiled, and for the first time in months it felt genuine. "But I'm not leaving without you." Her eyes widened. "Marcus, that's impossible. I'm a Zephyrian military officer. I can't just disappear." "Can't you?" Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "What's keeping you here? Duty to an empire that sent you to guard duty as punishment. Loyalty to commanders who see you as nothing more than a convenient scapegoat? It's not that simple, isn't it? Marcus's hands moved to her shoulders, feeling the tension coiled there like compressed steel. Lyra, when was the last time you made a choice for yourself? Not for the Federation, not for your commanders, not even for Kale's memory, for you. The question hit her like a physical blow. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself, and Marcus could see the war raging behind her eyes. I don't know how to be anything else, she admitted. I've been a soldier since I was 16. The military is all I know. Then learn something new. Marcus followed her, not pushing but not retreating either. Come with me. See what's beyond the Federation's borders. Find out who Lyra Vex'hai is when she's not wearing armor. And go where? Do what? I'm a decorated war criminal in every human system. Marcus felt his heart skip. Not every system. There are places beyond the war, Lyra. Colonies that don't care about Federation politics or human resistance movements. Places where we could just be. The word hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine. Lyra looked at him with such vulnerability that Marcus felt his chest tighten. Is that what you want? She asked. To just be with me? Marcus had spent 3 months planning his escape, calculating odds, preparing for every contingency except this one. He'd never planned for the possibility that freedom might mean something completely different than he'd thought. Yes, he said, and the truth of it staggered him. More than I've ever wanted anything. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns flared brighter, a cascade of silver and blue that painted the corridor in ethereal light. The monitoring systems, she said suddenly. They'll have recorded everything, my decision to lower the barrier, our conversation. Not if we're in my cell, Marcus said quickly. You've been in there for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Well within the parameters of a routine inspection or medical check. She stared at him. You've been timing this. I've been timing everything for 3 months, Lyra. Guard rotations, system cycles, monitoring protocols. He smiled grimly. The Federation might think humans are just clever animals, but we're very good at learning patterns. What are you suggesting? Marcus took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin, the strength in her fingers. I'm suggesting we go back into my cell, reactivate the barrier, and finish what we started. But this time it's not about manipulation or dying requests or desperate gambles. Then what is it about? Marcus looked into her eyes, seeing himself reflected there, and for the first time in his life he understood what the poets meant when they wrote about souls recognizing each other. It's about 2 people who've spent their whole lives fighting other people's wars, deciding to fight for something that's theirs. Lyra's grip on his hand tightened. And if we're caught, then we're caught together. She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Doubt, deception, fear. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. But Marcus. Yeah? No more lies. Whatever happens between us, whatever we decide to do, it has to be built on truth. Marcus felt the weight of her trust settling over him like armor, protective and precious and absolutely unbreakable. No more lies, he agreed. They walked back into his cell together, and when Lyra reactivated the energy barrier, it felt less like a prison wall and more like a protective cocoon. The monitoring systems would show nothing unusual, a guard conducting a routine inspection of a compliant prisoner. But inside that small space, with the barrier humming between them and the rest of the universe, Marcus Chen and Lyra Vex'hai began to discover what it meant to choose each other over everything else they'd ever known. And for the first time since his capture, Marcus realized that maybe getting caught hadn't been the worst thing that could have happened to him. Maybe it had been the best. The next 3 days passed in a carefully choreographed dance of normalcy. To the outside world, nothing had changed. Lyra maintained her regular patrol schedule, Marcus remained the model prisoner, and the station continued its orderly rotation through the void. But beneath the surface, revolution was brewing. They communicated in whispers during meal deliveries, in subtle gestures during routine inspections, and in the careful positioning of objects in his cell that spelled out messages in a code Marcus had taught her. The Federation's surveillance systems, designed to detect escape attempts and security breaches, were blind to something as simple as 2 people falling in love. The transport bay, Marcus murmured, during what appeared to be a routine medical check. Lyra was running a scanner over him, her touch lingering longer than necessary as she checked his vital signs. Level 7. There's a maintenance window every 48 hours when the automated systems cycle through diagnostics. 6 minutes, Lyra replied, her voice barely audible as she updated his medical file on her tablet. maybe 7 if we're lucky. Enough time? To steal a shuttle and break through the station's defense grid? She paused in her scanning, meeting his eyes. Not even close. Marcus had expected this. The station was designed to be escape-proof, its security measures layered and redundant, but he'd been studying those measures for 3 months, looking for the one weakness that every system had. "We don't break through the defense grid," he said. "We convince it to let us go." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Every security system has override codes, emergency evacuation protocols that can be triggered by senior personnel." Marcus kept his voice level, but inside his heart was racing. "How senior is your clearance level?" "Level 7. I can authorize emergency evacuations for my sector, but..." Her eyes widened as she understood. "Marcus, triggering a false evacuation alarm is a court-martial offense. Only if they catch us." Marcus shifted position on the examination table, using the movement to mask their conversation from the overhead monitors. "And if we're successful, court-martial will be the least of our problems." Lyra finished her scan and stepped back, her expression troubled. "You're talking about treason on a scale that could start a diplomatic incident. I'm talking about survival, yours and mine." She stood quietly for a moment, processing the implications. Marcus could see the conflict playing out across her features, the trained soldier warring with the woman who'd chosen to trust him. "There's something else," she said finally. "Captain Threnor has been asking questions about my patrol schedules. He's suspicious." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "How suspicious?" "Enough that he's assigned secondary monitoring to my shifts. As of tomorrow, I won't be alone with you anymore." The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. Their window of opportunity was closing faster than he'd anticipated. "How long do we have?" "Tonight," Lyra said grimly. "If we're going to do this, it has to be tonight." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing through contingencies and backup plans. "Can you access the transport bay during the night shift?" "Yes, but Marcus..." Lyra moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "If this goes wrong, they won't just execute you. They'll make an example of us both. Public trial, systematic dismantling of everything we've ever cared about." Marcus reached out and took her hand, feeling the tremor of fear beneath her warrior's composure. "Lyra, 3 days ago you told me that mercy was worth the risk. Do you still believe that?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Then trust me one more time." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I know it's asking everything of you, but..." "You're not asking," Lyra interrupted, and there was something new in her voice. Determination, laced with something that might have been joy. "I'm choosing. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want instead of what I'm supposed to want." The weight of her trust settled over Marcus like a mantle. "What do you want, Lyra?" She looked at him for a long moment, her alien features soft with emotion. "I want to wake up tomorrow somewhere they can't find us. I want to learn what it feels like to live without armor. And I want to find out if what's happening between us is real or just the product of impossible circumstances." Marcus felt his breath catch. "And if it's real, then we have something worth fighting for." The scanner in Lyra's hand chimed, indicating the completion of his medical check. She stepped back, resuming her professional demeanor, but not before Marcus caught the flash of silver and blue across her skin, bioluminescent patterns that spoke of excitement, fear, and something that might have been hope. "Prisoner 7749 shows normal vital signs," she announced for the benefit of the monitoring systems. "No medical anomalies detected." But as she gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, she caught Marcus's eye one final time. In that look, he saw everything they couldn't say aloud, promises, plans, and the kind of desperate courage that only came from having nothing left to lose. After she left, Marcus lay back on his bunk and stared at the ceiling, counting down the hours until nightfall. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the station's engines humming their eternal song, pushing them through the void toward an uncertain future. In 12 hours, he would either be free among the stars or dead in the vacuum of space. But for the first time since his capture, the prospect of death didn't terrify him, because for the first time in his life, he had someone worth dying for. And that made all the difference. As the station's lights dimmed to simulate planetary night, Marcus began his final preparations. Tomorrow, Marcus Chen and Lyra Vex'hai would either be fugitives running toward an uncertain future, or they would be nothing at all. But tonight, they were two people who had chosen each other over duty, fear, and the weight of their respective worlds. And that was everything. The station's night cycle brought with it an eerie quiet that seemed to amplify every sound. Marcus lay motionless on his bunk, counting heartbeats and tracking the subtle changes in the ambient noise that would tell him when Lyra's shift began. His escape plan, refined over months of observation, had always been theoretical. Tonight it would be tested with stakes he'd never imagined. At 0230 hours, he heard the soft whisper of footsteps approaching his cell. Not Lyra's measured stride, but something different, heavier, more deliberate. Marcus remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing as the footsteps paused outside his barrier. "Interesting," came a deep voice that made Marcus's blood run cold. Captain Threnor. Through barely opened eyes, Marcus could see the massive Zephyrian officer standing in the corridor, his scarred features illuminated by the soft glow of his tablet. Behind him stood two guards Marcus didn't recognize, special security by the look of their enhanced armor. "Sir," one of the guards asked quietly. "Commander Vex'hai's patrol logs show 17 unscheduled visits to this cell over the past week," Threnor said, his voice carrying dangerous undertones, "each lasting precisely 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Marcus fought to keep his expression neutral as ice formed in his veins. They'd been more careful than he'd thought, but apparently not careful enough. "Should we alert the commander, sir?" the second guard asked. "No," Threnor said after a long pause. "I want to see how this plays out. Post additional monitoring on this sector, but maintain standard protocols, and prepare a detention team, discreet but ready." The footsteps retreated, leaving Marcus alone with the terrifying knowledge that their carefully laid plans had already been compromised. Threnor knew something was happening, but not what. That gave them one advantage. The element of surprise was gone, but their specific plan remained secret. At 0300 hours, Lyra arrived for her shift. Marcus could tell immediately that something was wrong. Her stride was too measured, her posture too rigid. She'd sensed the trap. "Prisoner 7749, she announced with perfect military precision. "Routine security check." She approached the cell controls, and Marcus saw her hand tremble almost imperceptibly as she reached for the barrier deactivation. In that tiny gesture, he saw everything, her fear, her determination, and her unwavering trust in him despite the obvious danger. The barrier flickered and died. "You know," Marcus said quietly as she entered his cell, "don't you?" "Threnor posted additional monitoring 20 minutes ago," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Whatever we're going to do, we have maybe 10 minutes before they move." Marcus was already in motion, moving to the small ventilation grate he'd been slowly loosening over the past month. His fingers found the carefully weakened bolts, and the grate came free with barely a whisper of sound. "Marcus," Lyra said urgently, "the transport bay access codes have been changed. My authorization won't work anymore." Marcus paused, his heart sinking. Without the emergency evacuation protocol, they had no way to commander a shuttle without triggering every alarm on the station. "Then we improvise." He pulled a small device from its hiding place behind the loose panel, a jury-rigged scanner he'd built from components salvaged during his medical checks. "I told you I was good with machines, Lyra, but I never told you exactly how good." The device hummed to life, its improvised display showing the station's basic schematic. "Every security system has a weakness," Marcus murmured, fingers dancing over the crude interface. "The Federation builds redundancy into everything, but redundancy requires communication pathways." "What are you doing?" "Creating a cascade failure in the primary security grid. Not enough to damage the station, but enough to trigger automatic lockdown protocols." Marcus's eyes never left his device as he worked. "When that happens, emergency bulkheads will seal, and all non-essential personnel will be evacuated to designated safe zones, including the transport bay." "Including the transport bay." Marcus completed his modifications and looked up at her. "Lyra, once I trigger this, there's no going back. Are you ready?" She met his eyes, and in her alien features, Marcus saw the same desperate courage he felt burning in his own chest. "I've been ready, since the moment I met you." Marcus activated his device. Immediately, alarms began wailing throughout the station, not the sharp klaxons of a security breach, but the deep, rhythmic warning tones of a system malfunction. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in hellish red as automated voices began announcing evacuation procedures. "Move," Marcus said, and they were running. The corridors were chaos, crew members rushing toward designated evacuation zones, security teams trying to maintain order, and emergency systems cycling through increasingly urgent warnings. Marcus and Lyra moved through it all like ghosts, her military bearing providing camouflage while his knowledge of the station's layout guided their path. They reached the transport bay just as the first wave of evacuees arrived. The massive space was filled with emergency shuttles cycling through automated launch sequences, their engines throwing dancing shadows across the walls. In the confusion, 2 more figures among dozens were invisible. There, Lyra pointed toward a sleek reconnaissance shuttle near the far wall. Military grade, long-range capability. Can you pilot it? I can pilot anything that flies. She was already moving toward the shuttle, her fingers working on a portable interface device. But Marcus, once we launch, they'll know it was us. Every Federation ship in 3 systems will be hunting us. Marcus caught her hand as they reached the shuttle's boarding ramp. Lyra, are you sure? Really sure? Because once we cross this threshold, she silenced him with a kiss that tasted like ozone and starlight, and promises of impossible futures. When they broke apart, her bioluminescent patterns were blazing with emotions too complex to name. I love you, Marcus Chen, she said simply. Whatever happens next, I needed you to know that. The words hit him like a supernova, bright and warm and devastating. I love you too, he replied, and meant it with every molecule of his being. They boarded the shuttle together as the station's crisis deepened around them. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Marcus could see the vast nebula that surrounded them, painted in impossible colors against the absolute black of space. Hang on, Lyra said from the pilot's seat, her hands dancing over controls that looked like art installations. This is going to be rough. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and Marcus felt acceleration press him back into his seat as they launched into the night. Behind them, orbital station Nemesis fell away, growing smaller with each passing second. They were free. But as Marcus watched the station's lights fade into the cosmic distance, he knew their real journey was just beginning. Somewhere behind them, Captain Threnor would be realizing exactly what had happened. Somewhere ahead lay the vast unknown of space beyond Federation control. And somewhere between the past they'd abandoned and the future they'd chosen, Marcus Chen and Lyra Vex'hai would discover if love really was strong enough to survive among the stars. 6 hours into their flight, the reality of their situation began to settle in like cosmic dust on the shuttle's hull. Marcus sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching Lyra's hands dance across the navigation controls with the fluid grace of someone born to fly. The stolen reconnaissance shuttle hummed around them, its Federation technology responding to her touch like a living thing. How long before they catch up? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns dimmed as she considered the question. With standard pursuit protocols, maybe 18 hours, but Threnor won't use standard protocols. She adjusted their heading slightly, steering them toward a distant star cluster. He'll anticipate our moves, deploy interdiction fields at likely jump points, coordinate with patrol fleets across 3 sectors. So we don't use likely jump points. No, Lyra agreed. We don't. But Marcus, running dark through uncharted space is almost as dangerous as being caught. There are things out here that make the Federation look friendly. Marcus studied the star charts displayed on the main screen, noting the vast regions marked with warning symbols and danger ratings, such as pirate clans who shoot first and ask questions never, autonomous defense systems left over from the machine wars, gravity wells that can tear a ship apart before you even realize you're caught. She paused, her expression grim. And that's assuming we don't run into any of the forgotten. The what? Lyra's hand moved unconsciously to the pendant at her throat. Species that existed before the Federation. Most were wiped out during the expansion wars, but some just disappeared into deep space. The stories say they're still out there, waiting. Stories, Kyle used to tell them, she said softly. He was fascinated by xenoarchaeology, always talking about ancient ruins and lost civilizations. He believed that someday we'd find them again. The mention of her dead bondmate hung in the air between them like a ghost. Marcus felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy, followed immediately by guilt. Kyle had been part of her life, part of who she was. He wouldn't ask her to forget that. He sounds like he was a good man, Marcus said carefully. He was. Lyra's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. He would have liked you, I think. You both share that same stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. Before Marcus could respond, the shuttle's proximity alarms began shrieking, the main display filled with tactical readouts as 3 ships materialized from hyperspace directly ahead of them, sleek Federation interceptors, their weapons already powering up. This is Captain Threnor of the Federation vessel Retribution, came a voice over the communications array. Stolen shuttle, you are ordered to cut engines and prepare to be boarded. Comply immediately or face the consequences. Lyra's hands were already moving, rerouting power to engines and shields as she threw the shuttle into an evasive spiral that made Marcus's stomach lurch. "Marcus, get to the weapons console. We're going to have to fight our way out." "Lyra, those are your people." "No," she said firmly, laser fire beginning to streak past their viewport. "My people died with Kale. These are just soldiers following orders." Marcus strapped himself into the weapons station, his fingers finding controls that felt alien beneath his touch. The targeting display came online, showing the 3 interceptors moving to surround them in a classic pincer formation. "I don't know how to use Federation weapons," he said urgently. "Then learn fast," Lyra replied, throwing the shuttle through a barrel roll that brought them inside the formation. "Target the lead ship's engine nacelles. We don't want to kill anyone unless we have to." Marcus found the firing control and squeezed, watching blue energy bolts streak toward the nearest interceptor. His shots went wide, but the defensive fire forced the Federation ship to break formation. "Behind you!" Lyra shouted. Marcus spun in his seat to see the second interceptor diving toward them, its weapons charging for what looked like a killing shot. Time seemed to slow as Marcus realized he wouldn't be able to target them in time. Then Lyra did something impossible. She cut the engines completely and fired the maneuvering thrusters in reverse, causing their shuttle to flip backward while maintaining forward momentum. For a split second, they were flying tail-first at incredible speed, giving Marcus a perfect shot at their pursuer's vulnerable underside. He didn't waste it. His shots punched through the interceptor's shields and into its engine core. The ship didn't explode. Federation's safety systems were too good for that, but it began tumbling helplessly, its pilot fighting to regain control. "Where did you learn to fly like that?" Marcus gasped as Lyra restored their proper orientation. "Keitel wasn't the only one who studied ancient things," she replied, her patterns flashing with what might have been pride. "That was a Vorton combat maneuver from the pre-Federation wars." The third interceptor was closing fast, but instead of engaging, it suddenly peeled away, retreating toward the edge of the system. Marcus frowned at the tactical display. "Why are they running?" Lyra's expression went pale. "Because they're not running from us." She pointed at the long-range sensors, where massive energy signatures were materializing. "They're running from that." A ship emerged from hyperspace that dwarfed the interceptors like a mountain compared to pebbles. The Federation Dreadnought Sovereign, flagship of the Third Fleet, its hull bristling with enough weaponry to level a small moon. "This is Admiral Koreth," came a new voice, deep and commanding. "All vessels in this system are ordered to stand down immediately. Any ship that does not comply will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." Marcus felt his hope crumble. They'd escaped a prison, evaded pursuit, and fought their way past interceptors, only to run headlong into one of the most powerful ships in the Federation fleet. "Lyra," he said quietly, I'm sorry I got you into this." She reached over and took his hand, her skin warm and alive and utterly unafraid. "You didn't get me into anything, Marcus Chen. I chose this. I chose you, and I choose to keep fighting." She turned back to the controls, her fingers dancing over systems Marcus couldn't begin to understand. "Hold on to something. We're going to do something really stupid." "Stupider than running from a dreadnought?" Lyra's smile was bright and fierce and completely mad. "Much stupider. We're going to run toward it." She fired the engines at full power, sending their small shuttles screaming directly at the massive Federation flagship. Behind them, Marcus could hear Admiral Koreth's voice demanding their surrender, but Lyra's attention was focused entirely on the navigation display. "There," she whispered, pointing at a barely visible icon on the edge of their sensors. "An uncharted jump point. The Dreadnought's gravity shadow is masking it, but if we can get close enough, you want to use a Federation Dreadnought as cover to reach an unknown hyperspace jump. Unless you have a better idea." Marcus looked at the impossible odds displayed on their tactical screen, then at the woman beside him, brave, brilliant, and completely committed to their shared madness. "I love the way your mind works," he said. "Tell me that again, when we're not about to be atomized." They raced toward the dreadnought at suicidal speed, fusion engines straining against their safety limits. Warning lights flashed across every surface as the ship's targeting systems locked onto them, preparing to swat them from space like an annoying insect. "Jump point in 30 seconds, Lyra announced. "Will we make it?" She looked at him, with eyes that held the depth of space itself. "Ask me in 30 seconds. Behind them, the Federation fleet opened fire, filling the void with enough energy to crack a planet's crust. Ahead of them lay the unknown, a jump point that could lead anywhere or nowhere, and between them and that uncertain future was nothing but love, hope, and the kind of desperate courage that only came from having everything to lose and everything to gain. 29 seconds and counting, the universe exploded into light and impossibility as their shuttle hit the uncharted jump point. Marcus felt his consciousness stretched across dimensions he couldn't name, his perception fragmenting into crystalline shards that showed him glimpses of things that shouldn't exist, vast cities floating in empty space, stars arranged in perfect geometric patterns, and beings of pure energy dancing between galaxies. Then reality reasserted itself with the force of a collapsing star, and Marcus found himself pressed back into his seat as their shuttle tumbled out of hyperspace into nothing. No, not nothing. Something far stranger. They hung suspended in a sphere of absolute darkness, surrounded by what looked like the remnants of an ancient space station, but a station built on a scale that dwarfed anything the Federation had ever imagined. Vast metal ribs curved away into the black, each one large enough to house entire cities. Strange lights pulsed along their length, in patterns that suggested intelligence, purpose, and vast age. "By the ancient stars," Lyra whispered, her bioluminescent patterns flickering in response to whatever she was seeing on the sensors. "Marcus, these readings, some of these structures are millions of years old." Marcus struggled to process what he was seeing. "Where are we?" "According to our navigation computer, we don't exist," Lyra replied, her voice tight with wonder and fear. "We're not on any star chart, not in any database. This place is completely outside known space." Their shuttle drifted deeper into the structure, pulled by some invisible force toward what might have been a docking bay. As they approached, lights began to activate in sequence, illuminating corridors and chambers that stretched away into infinity. "Something's guiding us in," Marcus observed, watching the navigation display track their path. "Something that knows we're here. Should I resist?" Marcus studied the readings, looking for any sign of weapons or hostile intent. All he saw was curiosity, vast, ancient, and patient. "No, I think we're being invited." The docking process was unlike anything either of them had ever experienced. Instead of mechanical clamps or magnetic locks, their shuttle was simply held in place by forces that seemed to understand exactly what they needed. The moment they touched down, atmosphere flooded the bay, not just breathable air, but a perfect mixture for both human and Zephyrian physiology. "It's adapting to us," Lyra said in amazement. "Whatever built this place, it's still active, still learning." They made their way to the shuttle's exit ramp, weapons drawn but somehow certain they wouldn't need them. The moment the ramp lowered, Marcus felt a presence touch his mind. Not invasive or threatening, but gentle, like a grandfather's hand on a child's shoulder. "Welcome," came a voice that wasn't quite a voice, speaking in concepts rather than words. "We have been waiting so very long for visitors." Marcus and Lyra stepped onto the docking platform together, their hands instinctively finding each other as they faced the impossible. The bay around them was carved from what looked like a single piece of crystal, its walls reflecting their images in infinite recursion. But the reflections weren't quite right. In some they appeared as they were, in others as they might have been, and in still others as they could yet become. "Who are you?" Lyra asked, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "We are the architects," came the reply. "We who built the first roads between stars before your species learned to name the sky. We who withdrew when the younger races began their wars of expansion." A figure materialized before them, not quite solid but substantial enough to cast shadows. It was humanoid in the most general sense, but composed of flowing energy that shifted between states of matter. When it spoke, Marcus felt the words resonate in his bones. "You are refugees," it observed, "fugitives from the empire that now claims dominion over our ancient territories. You seek sanctuary." "We seek freedom," Marcus replied. "The right to exist without being defined by the wars of others." "Ah," the entity seemed pleased. "A worthy goal. But tell us, young builders of machines and weapons, what would you do with such freedom if it were granted?" Marcus looked at Lyra, seeing his own wonder and uncertainty reflected in her alien features. "I don't know," he admitted. "We never got that far in our planning." "Honesty, rarer than you might expect among your kinds." The entity gestured, and the crystal walls around them became transparent, revealing the vast structure that surrounded them. "This is Nexus Station, Built when your galaxy was young and uncharted, we created it as a meeting place, a neutral ground where species could come together in peace. Marcus stared at the impossible architecture stretching away in all directions. It's beautiful. It is empty, the entity replied sadly. For eons we have maintained it, hoping that someday the younger races would grow beyond their need for conflict. Instead, they have grown more efficient at destruction. Lyra stepped forward, her military bearing evident even in this surreal environment. Why are you showing us this? Because you represent something we had thought lost. Two beings from warring species who chose love over conflict, understanding over prejudice. The entity's form brightened slightly. In you we see the potential for what this station was meant to be. I don't understand, Marcus said. You will. But first, you must choose. Behind you lies the path back to your old lives. We can return you to Federation space, grant you new identities, even provide you with a ship fast enough to outrun any pursuit. You could live quiet lives on some frontier world, forgotten by the powers that seek you. Marcus felt his heart skip. The offer was everything they dreamed of: safety, anonymity, a chance to be together without the weight of two civilizations hunting them. Or, the entity continued, you can stay, learn, become something new. Help us prepare this station for a future when your peoples might be ready for true peace. What would that mean? Lyra asked. It would mean becoming ambassadors to species you've never heard of, mediators in conflicts that span centuries, guardians of knowledge that could reshape the galaxy or destroy it. The entity's form solidified slightly, and Marcus could see what might have been eyes. It would mean accepting responsibility for something larger than yourselves. Marcus looked at Lyra, seeing the conflict playing out across her bioluminescent patterns. The safe choice was obvious. Take the new identities, disappear into the frontier, live quiet lives of anonymous happiness. But neither of them had ever been satisfied with the safe choice. If we stayed, Marcus said slowly, would we be prisoners here? Servants to an agenda we don't understand? You would be partners, the entity replied, free to leave whenever you chose, free to make your own decisions about how to use what you learned. We ask only that you approach the task with open minds and willing hearts. Lyra squeezed Marcus's hand. What do you think? Marcus looked around at the impossible beauty of Nexus Station, felt the weight of the choice settling over them like starlight. They could run, find some distant world, build a quiet life, raise children who would never know the wars that had shaped their parents. Or they could step forward into the unknown, accepting responsibility for something that might matter more than their individual happiness. I think, Marcus said finally, that we've spent our whole lives running from other people's wars. Maybe it's time we started building something of our own. Lyra's smile was like the birth of a new star. Together, together. Then welcome, the entity said, to your new home. And in that moment, Marcus Chen and Lyra Vex'hai stopped being refugees and became something entirely new. Bridges between worlds, guardians of possibilities, and proof that love really could transcend the boundaries that separated species among the stars. The vast station hummed around them, waking from its ancient slumber, preparing for a future none of them could imagine, but all of them would help create. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus and Lyra's arrival at Nexus Station, and the vast structure had become their world. Each day brought new revelations, chambers that materialized in response to their needs, archives containing the histories of 1,000 extinct civilizations, and training halls where they learned to navigate the complex politics of species they'd never imagined. Marcus stood in what the architects called the observatory, watching star patterns shift through dimensional viewing panels that made Federation technology look like stone tools. Beside him, Lyra practiced manipulating the station's energy flows, a skill that came naturally to her Zephyrian physiology but required careful training to master. Try extending your perception beyond the immediate, the architect guidance entity suggested, its form now familiar after weeks of instruction. They'd learned to call it Meridian, though it explained that names were fluid concepts for beings of energy. Feel the station's response to intention rather than thought. Lyra closed her eyes, her bioluminescent patterns settling into the deep blue silver of focused concentration. Around her, the chamber's crystalline walls began to resonate, their internal light pulsing in harmony with her heartbeat. Slowly, sections of the station that had been dormant for millennia began to activate, their ancient systems awakening to serve their new purpose. Incredible, Marcus murmured, watching readouts that showed entire sectors coming online. Lyra, you're not just controlling the station, you're communicating with it. It's not control, Lyra said, opening her eyes with wonder. It's partnership. The station wants to help, to serve its original purpose. It's been lonely. Meridian's form brightened with what might have been approval. You begin to understand. Nexus Station was never meant to be ruled, but to be lived with, grown with. You are becoming part of its consciousness, just as it becomes part of yours. Marcus felt a familiar mixture of awe and unease. The power they were learning to wield was staggering. They could monitor communications across a dozen star systems, open dimensional gateways to distant worlds, even influence the quantum fluctuations that governed hyperspace travel. But with that power came responsibility that sometimes felt crushing. Meridian, he said, show us the current conflicts. The observatory's walls transformed into a three-dimensional star map, each system color-coded according to its current state. Red indicated active warfare, orange showed building tensions, and the rare spots of green marked regions at peace. The map was predominantly red and orange, a galaxy consumed by conflicts both old and new. The hegemony war has spread to the outer rim, Lyra observed, pointing to a cluster of red systems. 3 species fighting over mining rights to asteroids that will be depleted within a decade. And here, Marcus indicated another region, the Federation is blockading Tau Ceti because they suspect the colonists of harboring human resistance fighters. 2 million civilians cut off from medical supplies over the actions of maybe 100 rebels. Meridian's form dimmed slightly. We had hoped your species might have evolved beyond such wasteful conflict. Instead, you have simply become more efficient at it. Marcus studied the map, his mind working through possibilities and consequences. What if we could show them alternatives? Not through force or manipulation, but by creating examples of what cooperation could achieve. How? Lyra asked. Marcus gestured to the vast station around them. Nexus was built as a meeting place, a neutral ground. What if we made it that again? Started small, trade disputes, resource conflicts, situations where both sides might benefit from mediation. An interesting proposal, Meridian mused. But how would you convince warring factions to trust beings they've never heard of, operating from a station that officially doesn't exist? Lyra's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. We don't. We convince them to trust each other. She moved to the station's communication array, her hands dancing over controls that responded to her touch like living things. Marcus, remember the story you told me about your resistance cell, how you managed to steal those Zephyrian shield generators? We intercepted a supply convoy by making both sides think the other had betrayed them, Marcus said slowly, beginning to understand. But Lyra, that was deception. No, it was truth presented from an unexpected angle. Lyra pulled up communications intercepts from the hegemony war. Look at this. The Kythera think the Valorians are attacking their mining platforms to gain strategic advantage. The Valorians think the Kythera are sabotaging their equipment to drive them away. But the energy signatures don't match either species' technology. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, studying the data. You think there's a third party involved. I think someone is playing both sides against each other while they strip mine the disputed systems. Lyra's patterns flashed with excitement. If we could prove that, both sides would have a common enemy instead of each other, Marcus finished. But how do we get them the information without revealing our source? Meridian's form solidified as it moved closer to their workstation. Perhaps it is time for you to learn about the Whisper Network. The entity gestured, and new displays materialized around them, communication pathways that seemed to exist between dimensions, carrying information faster than light across impossible distances. Long ago, when the galaxy was younger and its peoples more curious, we established methods of communication that transcended normal space. Networks of knowledge that could reach any world, any mind open to receiving them. You're talking about telepathic communication on a galactic scale, Lyra said, her voice filled with wonder and concern. Not telepathy as your species understand it, something far more subtle, the transmission of pure information, of truth itself, to those who needed it most. Meridian paused, studying their reactions. But such power requires the utmost care. Truth can heal, but it can also destroy. Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling over him. You're offering to teach us how to influence the galaxy's conflicts by providing strategic information to the right people at the right time. We are offering to teach you how to serve truth instead of agenda, how to help others find their own paths to peace instead of forcing them to follow yours. Lyra reached for Marcus's hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "This is what we're here for, isn't it? Not to hide from the war, but to help end it." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. 3 weeks ago she'd been a decorated war hero imprisoned by duty and loss. Now she was something new entirely, a bridge between worlds, a guardian of possibilities he was only beginning to understand. And she was his partner in every sense that mattered. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "Really ready? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back to simple lives and quiet happiness." Lyra's smile was radiant with purpose. "Marcus Chen, I was never meant for simple lives or quiet happiness, and neither were you." She was right, he realized. His entire life had been building toward this moment. Every skill he'd learned, every choice he'd made, every person he'd lost or saved, had prepared him for this responsibility. "Then let's begin," Marcus said, turning to Meridian. "Teach us to serve the truth." "With pleasure," the entity replied, and around them Nexus Station hummed with renewed purpose as its newest guardians took their first steps toward reshaping the galaxy's future. The war wasn't over, but for the first time in decades, Marcus Chen and Lyra Vex'hai had hoped that it could be, and in a universe torn apart by conflict, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. The Whisper Network felt like drowning in starlight. Marcus floated in a sensory deprivation chamber filled with quantum-responsive fluid, while Lyra, connected to the station's consciousness, guided their shared perception across impossible distances. Through the network, he could feel the thoughts and emotions of beings scattered across the galaxy, not their private thoughts, but the truths they carried, the knowledge they possessed, and the lies they told themselves. "There!" Lyra's voice came through their neural link, warm and steady, despite the vast forces flowing around them. "Admiral Vorthak of the Kithara fleet. He's reviewing casualty reports from the latest engagement." Marcus focused his perception, feeling his consciousness stretch across space to touch the mind of an alien military leader he'd never met. What he found there surprised him. Not the cold calculation he'd expected, but grief. Deep, overwhelming grief for the soldiers under his command. "He doesn't want this war," Marcus reported through their link. "He's looking for any excuse to pull his forces back, but his government won't let him." "And here's Captain Zorex of the Valorian Defense Corps," Lyra added, her awareness branching in another direction. "Same story. She's got 3 daughters back home, and she's terrified this conflict will spread to the inner systems." Through the network, Marcus could see the web of truth that connected the warring factions. Both sides were fighting not out of aggression, but out of fear. Fear that withdrawal would be seen as weakness. Fear that their enemies would gain advantage. Fear that their own people would see them as failures. But beneath that fear was something else. Traces of outside influence. Subtle manipulations that had pushed diplomatic solutions off the table and made war seem inevitable. "Meridian," Marcus called through their connection. "Can you trace these influence patterns? Someone's been very carefully shepherding both sides toward conflict." "We see it," Meridian replied, its consciousness vast and ancient compared to their own. "The signature is familiar and troubling." Images flowed through the network, data streams that told a story of manipulation spanning decades. A mining consortium called the Harvest Syndicate had been quietly acquiring extraction rights in systems adjacent to the disputed zone. They'd funded extremist groups on both sides, provided false intelligence that made cooperation seem impossible, and positioned themselves to move in once the major powers had exhausted themselves fighting. "It's brilliant," Marcus admitted grudgingly. "Let 2 species tear each other apart, then swoop in and claim the resources while they're rebuilding." "It's monstrous," Lyra corrected, her anger rippling through their shared connection. "Millions of deaths for profit margins." The question becomes, how do we reveal this truth without exposing our own involvement? Meridian's presence was like a calm center in the storm of galactic consciousness. Direct intervention would only create new fears, new conflicts. Marcus considered the problem, drawing on everything he'd learned during his years in the Resistance. "We don't reveal it directly. We create a situation where they discover it themselves." "How?" Marcus smiled, though his body was kilometers away from Lyra's physical location. "We give them what every good strategist needs, better intelligence than their enemies." Working through the network, Marcus began to trace communication patterns between Harvest Syndicate operatives and extremist cells on both sides. The mercenaries were good, but they weren't perfect. They left digital footprints, financial trails, and most importantly, they had to coordinate their activities across multiple star systems. "There," he said, highlighting a pattern of encrypted transmissions. Harvest is planning to escalate the conflict next week. They're going to stage an attack on a civilian transport and make it look like the other side did it. Lyra's consciousness sharpened with understanding. And if both military commanders just happened to intercept intelligence about this planned attack, they'd have to choose between allowing civilians to die or cooperating to prevent it, Marcus finished. Even if they don't trust each other, they both have honor codes that protect non-combatants. An elegant solution, Meridian observed, but executing it will require perfect timing and absolute precision. The slightest error could make the situation worse instead of better. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling over him like a star's gravity. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Real lives hung in the balance of their actions. "Lyra, are you ready for this?" Through their connection, he felt her determination like a flame against the cosmic dark. "I've been ready since we made the choice to stay here." They began their work, carefully crafting information packets that would appear to come from each side's own intelligence networks. The data had to be believable, actionable, and most importantly, it had to lead both commanders to the same conclusion without seeming coordinated. For Admiral Vorthak, they provided intercepts of Harvest communications that appeared to come from a Kythera deep space monitoring station. For Captain Zorex, they delivered the same intelligence through what looked like captured Valorian reconnaissance data. "Transmitting now," Lyra announced, her consciousness interfacing directly with the station's communication arrays. Across the galaxy, quantum-encrypted messages materialized in secure military networks, carrying truth disguised as routine intelligence. Marcus held his breath as he watched the recipients process the information through the network's awareness. Admiral Vorthak was the first to act. Within minutes of receiving the intelligence, he was ordering his communications officer to open a priority channel to the Valorian fleet. "This is Admiral Vorthak of the Kythera Defense Force," came his voice across the void, formal but urgent. "I need to speak with Captain Zorex immediately regarding a matter of mutual concern." Through the network, Marcus felt Captain Zorex's surprise and suspicion. "Admiral, we are currently in a state of armed conflict. I'm not authorized to—" "Captain," Vorthak interrupted, "how many civilian transports are you expecting through the Meridian shipping lanes in the next 48 hours? The question caught her off guard. Marcus could feel her confusion through their connection, followed quickly by understanding as she processed the intelligence she'd received. "3 scheduled departures from Valorian space," she said slowly. "Admiral, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that someone wants us to start killing civilians, and I'm suggesting that neither of us is going to let that happen." The silence that followed stretched across space, filled with the weight of choices that could reshape the balance of power in 3-star systems. Finally, Captain Zorex spoke. "What do you propose?" "A temporary ceasefire, 48 hours. Long enough to verify this intelligence and determine who's really pulling the strings in this conflict." Marcus felt hope bloom in his chest as he watched 2 military leaders choose cooperation over conflict. It wasn't perfect. There would be political consequences, questions from their respective governments, accusations of weakness or betrayal. But it was a beginning. "Agreed," Captain Zorex said finally. "Admiral, I'm transmitting our patrol routes. If this intelligence is accurate, we'll need to coordinate our response." "Acknowledged, Captain. And Captain, when this is over, perhaps we should have a longer conversation about who benefits from our peoples tearing each other apart." Through the network, Marcus felt the moment when everything changed, not just for these 2 commanders, but for the galaxy itself. Truth had been served, not through force or manipulation, but by giving good people the information they needed to make good choices. "We did it," Lyra whispered through their connection, her joy radiating like sunlight. "You have taken your first steps," Meridian confirmed, pride evident in its ancient consciousness. "But remember, this is only the beginning. Truth is a powerful force, but it must be wielded with wisdom and restraint." Marcus nodded, though he knew Meridian couldn't see the gesture. They'd prevented one atrocity, possibly saved thousands of lives, and opened a door to peace between 2 warring species. But Harvest Syndicate was still out there, still profiting from conflict, still manipulating civilizations into destroying each other. "What's our next move?" he asked. Lyra's answer came through their bond, warm with love and fierce with purpose. "We keep serving the truth. One life, one choice, one moment of hope at a time." And in the vast darkness between stars, Marcus Chen and Lyra Vex'hai continued their work, guardians of light in a galaxy that had forgotten what peace looked like, but was slowly beginning to remember. 2 years later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching a sight that would have been impossible when they first arrived, a diplomatic convoy approaching from Federation space, flying alongside ships from a dozen other species in perfect formation. The weekly Concord meetings had become the galaxy's most important diplomatic forum, and today marked the 2nd anniversary of the Meridian Accords that had ended the Hegemony War. "Nervous?" Lyra asked, joining him at the massive viewport. Her bioluminescent patterns had evolved over the past 2 years, now displaying complex equations and diplomatic protocols that helped her interface with the station's ever-expanding consciousness. "Excited," Marcus corrected, slipping his arm around her waist. "Remember when we thought our biggest problem was escaping a prison cell?" Lyra laughed, the sound echoing in the crystal-lined chamber that had become their favorite retreat. "Now we're hosting peace negotiations between species that have been at war for centuries. I'm not sure if we've gotten better at solving problems or just better at finding bigger ones." Through the station's vast windows, they could see the impossible sight of Federation dreadnoughts, docked peacefully beside Zephyrian battle cruisers, Valorian patrol ships, and vessels from dozens of species that had never trusted each other enough to share the same system, let alone the same station. "Meridian's right," Marcus said, watching a group of young diplomats from mixed species backgrounds making their way through the station's corridors. "We really are witnessing the birth of something new." The Whisper network had proven more powerful than any of them had imagined. Over the past 2 years, Marcus and Lyra had exposed 17 different conflicts that turned out to be artificially created by outside forces. The Harvest Syndicate had been just the beginning. There were entire corporations, rogue military factions, and ancient AI systems that profited from keeping the galaxy's species at each other's throats. But for every manipulation they revealed, they'd also created opportunities for genuine cooperation, trade agreements that benefited everyone, scientific collaborations that pushed the boundaries of knowledge, cultural exchanges that helped species understand they had more in common than they'd ever imagined. "Do you ever miss it?" Lyra asked quietly. "The simplicity of when it was just us against the universe?" Marcus considered the question, watching through their neural link as hundreds of beings worked together to solve problems that had seemed impossible just months ago. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember what we've built here, and I know we made the right choice." The station around them hummed with life and purpose. What had once been an ancient, empty monument to failed hopes was now a thriving center of galactic civilization. Gardens grew in chambers that adapted their atmospheres to support life from 100 different worlds. Libraries contained the accumulated knowledge of species both living and extinct, and in the deepest levels, young beings from across the galaxy learned to use the Whisper network responsibly, becoming the next generation of truth servers. "The Federation Council wants to make our marriage official under galactic law," Lyra said, her pattern shifting to soft gold with amusement. "They're calling it a symbol of interspecies cooperation." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Our marriage? When did we get married?" Apparently, according to Zephyrian custom, 2 people who share a neural link for longer than a year are considered bonded for life. Lyra's smile was radiant. "Congratulations, husband. You've been married for 8 months without knowing it." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat, then settle into a rhythm that somehow perfectly matched Lyra's through their connection. "Well then, wife, I suppose we should make it official." Their kiss was interrupted by Meridian's consciousness, touching their minds with gentle humor. "The Arcturus delegation has arrived early, and they're asking to meet with the legendary humans who tamed the war goddess of Zephyr." "I believe they're referring to you both," Lyra groaned. "I'm never going to live down that reputation, am I?" "It could be worse," Meridian pointed out. "The Centauri delegation still believes Marcus is a mythical trickster god who can appear in multiple places at once. That's only because we used the quantum duplicators during the Tau Ceti negotiations," Marcus protested. "And it worked, didn't it?" Through their bond, he felt Lyra's affection and exasperation in equal measure. They'd become legends across the galaxy. The human and Zephyrian who'd chosen love over war, who'd transformed a space station into a symbol of hope, who'd proven that peace was possible even in the darkest corners of the universe. But to Marcus, the most important truth was much simpler. They'd found each other. "Ready for another day of saving the galaxy?" Lyra asked, adjusting the ceremonial robes they wore for formal diplomatic functions. "Ready for another day with you," Marcus corrected, taking her hand as they made their way toward the conference chambers. The main assembly hall was a masterpiece of adaptive architecture. Its walls, floor, and ceiling could shift to accommodate any species' environmental needs, while its acoustic systems translated languages in real time. Today, it hosted representatives from 47 different worlds, all working together on the Galactic Cooperation Charter. As they entered, conversations paused and beings from across the known galaxy turned to acknowledge them, not with the fear or suspicion that had once greeted their names, but with respect, hope, and something that looked remarkably like gratitude. Ambassador Takora of the Federation stood first, her formal bearing softened by genuine warmth. Guardians Chen and Vex'hai, thank you for joining us. We were just discussing the proposal for expanding the Whisper network to the Outer Rim territories. The logistics are complex, added Captain Zorex, now serving as the Valorian representative, but the potential benefits are enormous. 3 more regions could achieve lasting peace within the decade. Marcus and Lyra took their seats at the center of the assembly, not as leaders but as facilitators. Their role had evolved over the past 2 years, from secret manipulators to open advocates for truth and cooperation. Before we discuss expansion, Marcus said, let's address the reports from the Andromeda expedition. Dr. Caney, a young human scientist, stood, her excitement barely contained. Guardians, we've made contact with 3 new species in the Andromeda galaxy. All of them are interested in establishing diplomatic relations, and one has technologies that could revolutionize our understanding of dimensional physics. The implications were staggering. The galaxy that had once seemed vast and full of conflict was now just one small part of an infinite universe filled with possibilities. As the meeting progressed, Marcus felt a deep satisfaction settle over him. This was what they'd built, not through force or manipulation, but by giving people the truth they needed to make good choices. Every species represented here had chosen cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice, hope over fear. Any final business? Lyra asked as the formal agenda concluded. Ambassador Takora stood again, her expression ceremonial but warm. Actually, there is one matter. The Council has asked me to present this. She produced a small device that projected a holographic document into the air above them, the Galactic Peace Accord, signed by every major power in the known galaxy. As of today, Takora announced, the last of the pre-contact wars has officially ended. For the first time in recorded history, our galaxy is at peace. The silence that followed was profound, not the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the silence of beings contemplating something they'd never dared to hope for. Then Lyra began to laugh, bright, joyful sounds that filled the massive chamber. Marcus, she said through their bond, do you realize what this means? Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as the magnitude of their accomplishment settled over him. We did it. We actually did it. The assembly erupted in celebration, dozens of species expressing joy in ways that would have been cacophonous if not for the station's translation systems. Through the Whisper network, Marcus could feel the news spreading across the galaxy, touching minds on 1 trillion worlds with the simple, impossible truth: the wars were over. Later, after the celebrations had wound down and the diplomats had returned to their ships, Marcus and Lyra stood together on their observation deck, watching the stars in comfortable silence. What happens now? Lyra asked, her patterns soft with contentment. Marcus considered the question, feeling the vast weight of possibility stretching out before them. Now we explore, we learn, we help other galaxies find their own paths to peace. He paused, then smiled. And we live, really live, for the first time in our lives. Lyra moved closer, her warmth a perfect counterpoint to the cosmic cold beyond the viewport. Together? Always together. They stood in silence, 2 beings who had started as enemies and become something that transcended species, culture, and the vast distances between stars. Around them, Nexus Station hummed with the dreams of a galaxy at peace, while the universe itself seemed to sparkle with infinite potential. Marcus Chen had been a prisoner, a rebel, a fugitive, and a guardian. But most importantly, he had been loved, and he had loved in return. In a universe that often seemed hostile to hope, they had proven that connection was possible, that understanding could bridge any gap, and that love really was the strongest force in creation. And as the stars wheeled in their eternal dance around them, Marcus and Lyra began planning their next adventure together, explorers of possibility, servants of truth, and living proof that sometimes the most impossible dreams were the ones most worth fighting for.